Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that every country on Earth had disappeared. No borders, no passports, no immigration offices, no flags telling you where places begin. You could cross a valley and never know you had entered another country. And here's the strange part. The mountains and rivers would still be there. Nature never drew political lines across those landscapes for us. So, where did countries come from? Not from one inventor, but from thousands of years of human experimentation. Humans slowly learned to organize themselves into larger and larger communities. At first, many humans lived in small groups that moved together for food and safety. Then some groups began staying in one place instead of constantly moving. They planted crops, stored food, built homes, and defended valuable places. Villages became larger, and larger communities needed more organization. Some villages eventually became cities, and cities developed governments. Cities became states. States became kingdoms and empires. And much later, the modern country emerged from this enormous human experiment. Before humans created states, they created something much more basic: social groups. For most of human history, survival depended on cooperation. One person could hunt while another gathered plants, and another watched children. Others could protect the group from danger. These groups were not countries. They had no passports, flags, or official borders. People knew who belonged because they shared relationships, traditions, and daily life. Imagine another group approaching from across the landscape. Nobody would ask, "What country are you from?" Instead, they would want to know, "Who are you?" Your identity came from the people you personally knew. But groups could grow, and growth brought new advantages and new problems. Who gets the best food? Who decides where everyone should move? What happens when someone steals, fights, or breaks an important rule? Personal relationships could solve many problems, but not every problem. Humans were learning to cooperate with people they did not personally know. One of the biggest changes came when humans began farming and living permanently in one place. A mobile group could move away when conditions became difficult. A permanent village could not simply pack everything up and leave. Houses, fields, and stored grain made one location increasingly valuable. And when something becomes valuable, people begin competing over it. Fertile soil, fresh water, grazing land, and trade routes could all become worth defending. Then food storage created another powerful change: surplus. Extra food could support people who were not producing food every day. Builders, traders, warriors, religious specialists, and administrators could become more important. But surplus food also created a new question: who controls it? Someone had to decide how food, land, and water were distributed. Someone also had to settle arguments between people who wanted the same resources. A village of 50 people could rely heavily on personal relationships. Same village expanded into a large settlement with many stick figures and buildings, pale tan background. It needed rules, leaders, organization, and eventually institutions. Large village gathered around a central stick figure leader, pale cream background. But early leaders probably did not look like modern presidents or kings. An experienced elder might settle disputes between families. A skilled warrior might lead when another group attacked. A religious specialist might influence ceremonies and important decisions. And wealthy families could gain influence by controlling valuable resources. But why would ordinary people accept someone else's authority? One reason was simple: leaders could organize things individuals could not. They could coordinate irrigation, construction, food distribution, and defense. If leadership made the community safer, cooperation became worthwhile. But power could also strengthen itself. A leader with food, warriors, and religious influence could defeat rivals. Eventually, authority became bigger than one person's personality. People began obeying the position itself, not only the person holding it. That was a crucial step towards something much bigger: the state. Once communities became larger, another problem appeared: territory. Imagine two villages depending on the same river. Both need its water for drinking, farming, and animals. During a drought, suddenly every part of that river becomes important. This is where boundaries become useful. A boundary tells people who controls a particular area. Early boundaries were not always straight lines drawn on maps. They could follow rivers, mountains, forests, roads, or walls. But a boundary only works when people recognize it. That meant humans needed shared rules. Who owns this field? Who can use this river? Who can enter? Rules turned vague expectations into predictable behavior. But rules were not always fair, especially when powerful people controlled them. Stronger communities could impose their boundaries on weaker communities. Countries therefore emerged from both cooperation and conflict over territory. Eventually, some settlements became so organized that historians call them early states. One important region was Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Cities such as EVOLIQ developed remarkably complex systems of administration. They had food stores, temples, workshops, officials, workers, and soldiers. Managing all of those people required something earlier villages rarely had. It required systems for recording and organizing information. Close visual of stick figure pressing symbols onto a clay tablet, pale orange background. Early writing often recorded practical things like grain, animals, goods, and workers. Writing helped governments remember information that no single person could memorize. Taxes could be recorded. Goods could be counted. Workers could be assigned. Laws could also be preserved and communicated across a large population. The government was becoming more than one powerful person. It was becoming a system of institutions working together. That system could collect resources, organize labor, enforce rules, and control territory. These were early states, but they were not yet modern countries. Once states existed, humans discovered another possibility: expansion. A powerful state could conquer neighboring territory or form alliances. It could also control valuable trade routes. This created kingdoms and eventually enormous empires. An empire could contain many different peoples under one political authority. They might speak different languages and follow different traditions. Yet they could still belong to the same political system. Roads helped armies, officials, merchants, and messages travel across huge distances. Taxes and resources could move toward a central government. Local governors could represent the ruler in distant regions. Symbols helped remind people that the same authority ruled across the territory. But empires were often fragile. Weak governments could face rebellion, invasion, or disputes over succession. Borders could move, governments could disappear, and new states could emerge. The map of human civilization was never permanent. It was always changing. Now we reach the country that feels familiar to us. Modern countries are different from many ancient kingdoms and empires. They usually claim sovereignty over a clearly defined territory. People living there may also have a legal identity, citizenship. Citizenship can provide rights, responsibilities, protection, and political participation. But modern countries depend on something else too: national identity. Millions of strangers can imagine themselves as part of one community. They may share language, history, symbols, stories, or political ideals. One stick figure looking across a huge crowd of unfamiliar figures, pale cream background. Yet you may still think of them as belonging to the same national community. Governments reinforce that identity through schools, laws, ceremonies, and public institutions. Modern borders can also be precisely mapped, surveyed, marked, and negotiated. So the modern country was not created in one moment. It was assembled from thousands of years of political experiments. And that brings us to the strangest part of the story. Here is the twist. A country is not a physical object like a mountain or river. You cannot pick up a country, and nature does not naturally draw its borders. The land is real, but the political meaning attached to it is created by people. That does not mean countries are meaningless or imaginary. Money, laws, corporations, and citizenship also depend on shared human ideas. Ideas become powerful when millions of people agree to treat them as real. A border works because governments recognize it and institutions enforce it. A passport works because countries agree what that document means. Even a national flag gains power because humans attach meaning to colored cloth. This is one of humanity's strangest abilities: shared imagination. It lets strangers cooperate on a scale our ancient ancestors could barely imagine. The first country was therefore probably not one invention. It was a process. Groups became villages, villages became cities, and cities became states. States became kingdoms and empires, while ideas of citizenship and identity continued evolving. So a world map is really a picture of thousands of years of human cooperation and conflict. Subscribe to EVOLIQ and watch more amazing videos.